Good morning, everybody. I was just doing a little studying or reading this morning and doing my devotion time, and I was wanting to just kind of share with you a little bit on. I was in Acts chapter 9, and I was just reading about Saul's conversion, and it really kind of struck me the last day or two, and this really kind of emphasized, and I think this is what the Lord has kind of laid on my heart is the topic of your testimony is something that is very very important to you. It's actually important to the Father, and I think that's why he emphasizes so much about being a witness, and being a witness to somebody else is something that is very special. It's a special thing because there's actually no greater feeling than to witness to somebody, and that seed might be sown into them in good soil, that it that it actually reaps a harvest later on. And Saul's story is a story that I think we can all kind of relate, a little bit. That we were blinded at one time. We were kind of just dead in our own transgressions, and we didn't even know it, and we thought we were living life right. At sometimes in everyone's life, I think there's a point where you start to question about, am I really doing things like I'm supposed to be, or is this all that life has to offer, or something like that. There's a question that'll come into mind, and you'll be asking yourself if this is the right thing to do. And if you've heard anything of the gospel, you'll question, is it really about me, or is it actually serving something bigger than myself? For Saul, I kind of really got to noticing that, it says here, and I'll just kind of paraphrase the first part of chapter 9, just because you can read this whole half a chapter and just for time's sake. But while Philip and while Peter are doing all the stuff in chapter 8, it says there that meanwhile Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. And so he even asked for a letter of approval that he can do this. He can go to towns around, he can go to Damascus and go, and if he finds any ones that follow the way, that's what they call it, following Christ, and he can arrest them and take them back to prison. That's his orders. And so on his way to Damascus, a bright light is shown and shown around him, and Jesus asked him, he says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Saul replies, "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." That's the NIV. The King James actually says it in verse 5 and 6. It says, Jesus says to him, it says, "It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. What wilt thou have me do?" Saul asked him, and that's where it comes in. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." I think it's important to realize there that Jesus tells him, he says, "It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks." What pricks? What's he talking about? I think it's very specific on, I think there's many times when you look back through Paul, I'll call him now Paul, when you look kind of back through his life, is God's kind of been calling him for a while. You go back into chapter 6 and stuff, and you start to see, Stephen, when he was sitting there holding the jackets holding all the coats for all the other guys who were throwing rocks. He listened, and he sat there and he listened through the entire Stephen's speech. And I think God was actually trying to move him in that moment, because he became very hard-hearted right after that, and he was actually fighting against what was going on inside of him. And I think for a lot of us, that's what we tend to do, is we tend to fight against this hurt that we might feel in our heart. And it finally takes, it takes a while for some of us. Maybe some of us are more stiff-necked than others, but for some reason, when we get that touch within inside of us, we want to fight against it. We want to go against the grain, so to speak. And so here Saul's doing the same thing. he's doing the same thing, and Jesus recognized that. He says that I'm touching your heart ever so often, and you just fight against it. And he says, well, what will you have me do? And then he gives him one step, and he says, go into the town, go into the city, and I'll tell you what you must do. So he goes to this guy's house, and he follows on down, and in there, in that moment, the Lord calls a disciple, Ananias, and he says to him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street, and there'll be a guy there, and you're going to pray over him, and he will receive his sight. And he tells him that it is Paul, or Saul at the time. He tells him it is Saul, and he says, wait a minute, I've actually heard of this guy, and he's hurting a lot of people in the kingdom. And he says, no, go anyway. And he says he is going to be used as a witness of mine, and he will be before the Gentiles, the kings, and before people of Israel, is what he tells them. Now I will show him he must suffer, how much he must suffer for my name. And so Ananias goes to Judas's house and prays over Saul. Now, this is just a kind of a quick comment, but I'm now that I've read it this morning, I'm actually wanting to do more. What is it about God picks Ananias to go to Judas's house? The last time we heard of Ananias, you remember that Ananias was, him and his wife were the ones who, in Acts, I believe it's Acts chapter 3, that that they go and they're the ones who withhold their giving to the church, and Peter talks to him, and he actually dies in front of Peter, and you can go read all that story. But there's Ananias, and then we all know who Judas was. And so maybe just kind of a quick thought is could it be that God is kind of maybe redeeming the name of those two individuals? I'm not saying he's saving the previous Ananias and the previous Judas. We know what happened to them. But I'm talking about he picks Ananias and Judas in the same story, and redeemed, and they're used as instruments. And this might be something to kind of show that maybe not every Patrick is bad. I certainly didn't start out very good, and I hope to be better tomorrow than I am today. And it's something to kind of make me think that I think a lot of people, we're identified by our name, and if there is one that is out there that has the same name as we have, and they're out there just running our name in the dirt, through the mud, it's kind of a hindrance on yourself, because it's like, well, I have that name. Is there something wrong with me too? Maybe I'm the only one that thinks like that. But here, God is actually kind of redeeming the two names. Now, I'm not going to get into that very far, because it's, obviously there's some more studying I need to do on it too. But it's just something that I seen as something interesting. And it's things like that I pick up on that I'll follow up and study later. But my point of this video is I want to ask you, what is your story? What is the story that on that day, when we come before the Father and we get to see people that we haven't seen in a long time, or we get to, we maybe even run up and shake Moses' hand, or we get to go see Elijah, or we get to go see all the disciples, the original disciples, and visit with them. And I thought to myself, well, man, talk about like Daniel or somebody, where you maybe go see them and you say, well, tell me about how that was when you were in the lion's den. I'd like to know what was going through your mind. And we idolize their stories, because they're stories that we live by. They're stories that we gain wisdom from. But you know what? I really got to speaking to me that when that day comes, will it even matter? Will it even matter what was going through their mind at that moment, or in time, or what was God doing in their life at that moment in time? Because in the end, the one thing we do know is God will get all the glory. God will be the one who just gets the credit for everything. And really, we are people that were used as an instrument. That's what God says that Paul's going to be, is he's going to be an instrument of mine. And so really, in the end, we're just kind of filling a void, and we're being used by God to go and minister to people and do it. But I'm not saying that it's not important, and you're not important, because you are. In God's eyes, you are very important. He's called you for a specific purpose in His kingdom. He has a job for you, and it blesses us as well as it blesses Him. But in the end, I want to ask, what is your story? Is it a story because everyone's got one? Everyone has a story, but is it one that on that day that you'll be able to say, yeah, you were in the lion's den, but let me tell you about what God did for me? You know, is your story just as important? And it is. It is. Have faith that it is, and have faith that there is purpose in your life, because your story is one that can still finish out in the book of Acts. If you don't know, we are still in the book of Acts. We're still going on. We're maybe in chapter, I don't know, 2020, if you want to call it that. But in chapter 2020, your story is in here. And I just want you to know that you do have purpose. We idolize a lot of the stories in the Bible, but I want you to know that your story is just as important as theirs. These are written down for us to learn from, but yours are written in the hearts of people around you. So I pray that you have a good day. May God bless and have a good week. And it's a nice day outside, so wind finally laid down. So we're going to go get something done. Have a good one.